So we're back with another review of The Last of Us Season 2. This time, episodes 4 and 5. We have Christian back once again. You want to introduce yourself again, Christian, for anybody who might not have seen the previous episodes you were on?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, my name is Christian. I am a teaching artist, filmmaker, and musician in Baltimore. I make music under the name Black Norma. And yeah, thanks for having me back, Deshaun.
No problem. These discussions are always great.
Yeah,
The reason I created this podcast was mostly to just have discussions about, art that I enjoy and to just think about them more critically and analyze them, help kind of get my thoughts about things out. And it's
yeah.
fun discussing this show with you.
Oh, no, same to you. Same to you.
Yeah. So we're going to start with episode 4 of season 2. Um, and it opens with Isaac, a new character if you haven't played the game, but of course, I should say, spoiler alert, for the games and also the entirety of the show so far. We're going to talk full spoilers for the 2 episodes we're watching and the game itself and things that happen in the future of the game. So if you don't want any future spoilers from the game, don't watch this review or skip this section of the podcast. So yeah, we start with Isaac. With Jeffrey Wright returning to play the character in live action. Jeffrey Wright also
Yeah.
voiced the character in the video game in The Last of Us Part Two.
Mhm.
And in this flashback, we see him at the beginning of his journey of fighting against Fedra, which is like the government that was left behind after the events of the apocalypse that are
Right.
set up across various major cities in the U.S. And we see in the first season. Actually, no, I don't think they show it as much in the first season, and we'll probably see it a lot more in the third season of the show in flashbacks of how Fedra kind of are just they're messed up. We see it a
Right.
little bit in the first season of the show, but I don't think
Yeah.
so far we've seen it as much as we do in the games. That Fedra
Yeah.
is, because of the circumstances, even more corrupt than the government is in real life at the moment, which is
Mhm.
a low bar, but
Yeah, the
uh,
bars in hell.
but they still manage it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, what did you think of this opening with Jeffrey Wright as Isaac?
Mm. I think it was one of the coolest starts to an episode in the series. Um, Already, like Isaac in the games, he was somewhat of a character, but already just in this scene alone, there's so much said about him, so much history given about him, and it's so effective. Yeah, just the entire scene was just very effective at showing his character and showing how key of a role he played in Fedra getting overruled by the wolves. Um, yeah, the story of shout out Josh Peck,
Oh yeah,
but
very
Josh
random
Peck,
cameo, but he was good.
yeah, yeah, no, it was a good cameo. But yeah, Josh Peck getting into the story about the term voters and basically like it was very locker room, like boys locker room, like basically they were just bragging about abusing people and brutalizing people. And Jeffrey Wright's character, he schools them and is saying, well, the reason why they're called voters is because they were denied their rights to vote. So people say it ironically. And immediately that bubble was burst of like, huh, we are powerful. And then they're reminded about how stupid they are. And, I feel like it leads to everything that happens after that scene. Like, I feel like there's so many layers there, um, in regards to just Isaac giving one of the Fedra soldiers a choice in regards to whether he wants to stay with Fedra or not, um, and how it ties later into the episode. But I don't want to jump ahead. But
I mean, yeah,
yeah,
no, we could
I like
we can jump to that part. I don't remember when it happens in the episode, but we can jump to it now, where almost
Um,
immediately we see how the WLF have become just as bad as Fedra, if not worse, with
yeah.
Isaac torturing one of the Seraphites to get information on their movements,
Mhm.
and him telling a story about pots and pans. A very compelling story because it's Jeffrey Wright and he's an incredible actor with an incredible voice.
Yeah.
And this man could just talk about pots and pans and make it sound interesting and make you care
Yeah.
about that. And
He made it.
by the end of that scene, we see the guy that he didn't kill when he killed the rest of those Fedra soldiers at the beginning of the episode is
Mhm.
now he's now much more jaded, and he, like Isaac, sees the Seraphites as animals and that they just need to be put down.
Mhm. Which, and almost, it took me a bit to realize that it was the same guy. Like it was the same timid soldier. But yeah, I feel like that soldier being given the choice to join the wolves just for the wolves to adopt that same sort of mindset. I think it definitely plays into what they're trying to get into with the season in regards to perspective, in regards to who's the good or the bad guys, and how, yeah, it really is about perspective there. But yeah, I think that the scene with the pan is very Craig Mazin. Like I feel like, and one of my friends pointed it out. He was just like, Craig Mazin loves using characters telling stories as a way to show character. Um, so like, yeah, just him talking about impressing on the people he was dating with cooking, and how he used to live a certain life before the apocalypse, but this is who he is now. And then we see him commit this act of brutality. It shows that even though it seemed like Isaac was well intentioned or that he cared about the people, he's turning that same sort of energy that Fedra had towards the Seraphites.
Yeah,
And
and we see essentially in a lot of ways, mine is kind of like the braggadociousness. That guy that Isaac let live essentially just became Josh Peck's character, where he now kind of just has no respect for the people of that world.
right,
But
yeah, and I know, yeah, everything you said.
yeah, but
Yeah,
when we get to Ellie and Dina in this episode, we open with the text Seattle Day One, which is a device that they use in the games, um,
yeah,
to mark the different chapters of the story, and you go through each day with the two characters you play as, and
mm,
as soon as that happened, we all knew, okay, there's 4 episodes including this one, so
right,
like, okay, we're gonna get day 2, day 3, but one of those episodes can't be one of those days unless they
right,
split some days between episodes. So what's that going to be? And that happened in episode 6, and we'll get to that later. But yeah, this is the beginning of kind of the structure of the game. It took them, they took their time getting here in comparison to the game. We talked before how, the game kind of just, it has to be a game, so you have to play it. So they want to get you
right,
to the action faster, whereas this
mm,
was allowed to take its time a lot more, and take its time getting to Seattle, and then the bulk of season 3 is going to take place in Seattle.
right. And yeah, overall with the pacing, especially with it being day one, I remember they do keep some of the day one stuff there. Um, like them running into the tank, them briefly alluding into how Fedra was overtaken. And we get the music store scene as well. But also, I remember in the game in day one, they were caught early. Like they were caught early by some of the wolf folks, and like,
Yeah, they cut out
yeah,
one of the. So I discovered that there wasn't just one; there were 2 people in Abby's group that they cut out. There was another woman, and there was another guy, um,
mm,
and they just combined the characters essentially with other characters. They combined. They just got rid of the other woman, the third woman, and then the third guy. They just merged with Manny. Um,
Right.
and in the game, they're riding on the horse. The horse gets blown
Yeah.
up, unfortunately, and dies. Uh, and then
Right.
they get captured, and then Ellie escapes, and then she tortures the guy who's a part of Abby's crew for information on everybody else. And yeah, they that just that's cut out completely because that character's no longer in this, which makes sense because it was a nothing character really who didn't add a lot
Yeah.
other than just an action set piece for the sake of the game itself. In the show,
Right.
that wasn't necessary. But something we
Hmm.
see as Ellie and Dina enter Seattle in this episode is a bunch of rainbows and pride flags all over the place, and they have no clue what it means because the world ended in 2003.
Right.
When was gay marriage legalized?
Was it around 20, like 13, maybe? Like around that time? Like I imagine like early teens.
Yeah, it was 2013, June 26th. 2015, I mean, June 26th.
Oh, 20. Okay.
So yeah,
Like 12 years
is-
before.
yeah, years before, over a decade. So
Yeah.
yeah, and then towards the end of the episode, we have Dina express a newfound pride in who she is. Playing into that earlier scene, but we'll get to that.
Right.
But yeah, I don't. Well, I guess kind of just jumping around a bit. We get the take on me scene with
Yeah.
Ellie, playing a guitar in the music shop, and it was just as good as it was in the game. And in the game, you could miss it. You could completely skip over it if you don't, spend your time searching around this more open area of the game.
Right.
And I'm a type of person, especially in a game like this where it's mostly linear. When you give me an open space to explore, I'm going to explore it and see everything that's there. So
Oh,
I
absolutely.
didn't miss that scene either times I played the game, but I know some people
Yeah.
did, and this time around, they were just like, no, we can't leave this incredible scene out, or make it something that you could miss, and it's just it's just in the show, and you get to enjoy it, and it's great.
Mm.
Another one of those things that are like, you know, pitch perfect from the game.
Right. And I feel like it's pitch perfect, and it's also one of the moments where it establishes the importance of guitar to Ellie and how that's an example of the connection between her and Joel.
Yeah.
And how it's like guitar is kind of like a love language for Ellie. So it's Ellie expressing that to Dina, and it's a optional scene in the game. So I feel like them putting it as something that the audience needs to see, I think is a testament to how important it is to the entire narrative because I mean, in the video game, they made an entire game mechanic for making guitar or for playing
Oh
guitar. They
yeah.
made an entire mechanic, and they definitely did that for a reason, for sure.
Yeah, and people were able to play some songs through it. It was cool.
Yeah,
Final
and
Fantasy VII Rebirth has a very similar mechanic, but for the piano. That's very fun.
see, this, I hope that becomes a standard, just like some sort of way to play an instrument with a game controller.
Yeah,
Because those people doing Last of Us covers, it was deep.
yeah. I'm sure there's probably going to be, if not already, an instrument that just straight up is played using a video game controller.
Yes.
That would be awesome.
Oh, in regards to the music store scene now, again, shout out to the production designers because it is the game.
Yeah,
It is exactly the game.
but speaking of exactly the game,
Mhm.
after the music shop, we get them seeing the radio station, and then waiting until nightfall to go and check it out. And the
Mhm.
radio station looks identical to the one in the game. And
Yeah.
even I don't know, even by the end of the show, where we get a lot more pitch perfect sets, this
Yeah.
is still, I think, the best one. It looks identical to the game, and as they move around it and go to different rooms, it looks all just like that space. And in the making of at the end of the episodes, they talk about how this is like one of their favorite sets, and like they put so much work and detail into it, and it shows. This set looks
Yeah.
incredible, down to The scene itself of people hanging with their guts spilled out by
Yeah.
the Seraphites, these WLF soldiers, and they're real, stunt performers up there on wires,
Right.
fake hanging, which is like arguably unnecessary
Like I
because of
said
how
about like rag
yeah,
dolls.
because of how
Like,
far they are, but they did it and it looks good.
mhm. Yeah, like I feel like that's a very good example of. I think this a lot of the episodes have great set design, but I feel like four might be the best potentially for me so far. Yeah, the set design in four is incredible because it really does feel like you're in the game.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
yeah,
And in the scene, we have WLF soldiers, barge
mhm,
in, and of course upset seeing their people, hung with their guts strewn over the place. And we hear one of the wolves order his men to kill even the children if they find them.
yeah,
And this just showing how messed up the wolves have become in comparison to what it seems like they started as, with as a righteous group of people trying to you know free the citizens from their oppressors, and now they've become the oppressors. And
mm,
in the inside the episode, or the making of, Craig Mazin says that the cordyceps aren't the only disease in this world. It's also tribalism. um
mm,
and it's that us versus them mentality among the non-infected that has been like the worst disease among them. And
yeah,
you see that in this episode.
yeah. Um, Especially in regards to well, it was in like one of the podcast episodes, but they were talking about the messages on the walls and how the walls are almost it's like the worst form of communication because they're talking to each other through the things that they're writing on the walls or through the messages that they're leaving. So it's like the way that they're talking is through their violence and through the acts of violence they commit on each other. 'Cause one of the details of that that television station set where the satellite is, it's the fact that on the walls it was painted in blood. So it's like they're communicating with each other, but they're communicating with each other in the worst, most depraved ways. Um, and I feel like yeah, Craig Mason definitely touched on that a bit, but overall, yeah, I think this episode is kind of about the disease of just of tribalism. Because even Dina is like, "What is going on in Seattle? What is going on here?"
Yeah. And as they get caught by the wolves and have to escape, we see Ellie put that training to use and take down a man twice her size, like she was training for in that the beginning of that very first episode.
Yeah, and
And yeah, from here we transition to the train station. Another great
point for
set.
point. Yeah, sets are incredible. Yeah, that was another fresh out of the game one too.
Yeah, that whole scene with the flares all over the place, the red lighting, it was incredible.
Yeah.
It was really good. But as they make their escape, Ellie gets bitten, trying to protect Dina. And just this whole situation and scene that happens afterwards, or yeah, just the scene that happens afterwards, leading up towards them going back to home base, is incredible. And Dina finding out Ellie's immune hits way harder in the show for me than it did in the game. In the
Absolutely.
game, Ellie's mask cracks, and in the game, the cordyceps are airborne. They're through spores versus the whole mushroom network. That's not a thing in the game. Instead, it's spores. And Ellie mask cracks, and Dina tries to give Ellie hers, but Ellie stops her and says, she's immune, and proves it by the
Yeah.
fact that she's not coughing because the spores, cause people to cough. But Ellie is kind of, just breathing it like it's fresh air. But
Mhm.
they get interrupted because they start getting chased by infected, which also happens in the show. So they don't have time to talk about it. And
Right.
Dina, it's still shaking up about it, and they have a conversation. but she, accepts it pretty quickly, or starts to
Yeah,
come to
very,
terms with it pretty quickly. And they get into an
yeah.
argument about Dina being pregnant, which we also get to that in the show. But in this, it's a much bigger deal because she got bit, and there's like
Mhm.
no proving you're not infected other than just waiting. So in that
Mhm.
moment, as soon as she sees that Ellie gets bit, she's automatic like, "Oh no, I have to kill her."
Yeah.
Immediately. And as they get back, she draws her gun on her. And we get an incredible scene of, Isabella Marced, acting her ass off.
Yeah, for real. Yeah.
um, and, Ellie being like, just keep your gun pointed at me. I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to wake up. I'm not going to be infected.
Yeah.
And it was incredible.
Which is far more effective because in the game, it really is quick, and it it should be a big deal that Ellie is immune. It should be a big deal and something that should be talked about. And then yeah, Dina saying that she's pregnant, it kind of undercuts the entire narrative beat. But Ellie getting bit, it increases the stakes even more. And it makes it a character moment for Ellie, it makes it a character moment for Dina, and it makes it a character moment for their relationship too, because it tests all of those things. Like I feel like what the show has done well so far, and especially this episode, it changes the context to make the stakes heavier and realer. And I feel like that's what they did with the way that they unveiled Ellie being immune here. Because yeah, getting bit is different from not coughing.
Yeah,
And
100%.
it's and it's visual and it's immediate and it's something that you can see. And it, I mean, I don't know. I keep on wanting to jump ahead, my fault. But there's so many. Ellie had to do that with Riley.
Yeah.
Like that, like, ah, this sucks. I got to do this moment. Seeing Isabel Marcet try to measure that and balance that while listening to Bella Ramsey, it was a very good scene, like a very just well performed scene.
Yeah. And it ends
So,
with once she realizes that Ellie isn't going to turn, with her saying that she's pregnant, and then immediately they start having sex, and I'm just like, whoa, wait a minute. I mean, yes,
mhm,
she's immune, but you're not immune, and you don't know
yeah,
how this works. You don't know if you can still get infected through having sex with this woman after she got bit. You don't know what's gonna happen. I feel
yeah,
like it's a TV show, it's whatever. But in real
yeah.
life, I'd be like, let's calm down, okay? Let's be safe.
Let's chill.
Let's wait a while. Let's let this thing like get through your system or something. Like,
Right.
I don't know if
Which
we
the
need to do this immediately.
yeah. Like that was the one thing where I was like, okay, because the pacing of that was so immediate. Like it was so fast. And
And another
like I
thing
didn't
in
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, another thing in terms of like the pacing of that is that like Ellie the next morning is immediately like I'm gonna be a dad, and like she's like ready to raise this kid with Dina, and I'm like, you guys, you kissed once and had sex. You're barely together, and you're talking about raising a child. But
Yeah.
it is a bit of a lesbian stereotype from what I know. Speed running relationships, and it's not
Yeah.
necessarily untrue or like a particularly bad stereotype, but that is a thing.
And we were talking about it like previously, and you're saying like it's definitely indicative of them being young,
One hundred
which
percent.
I can agree with for sure. Like I think with them being young, I feel like you're immediately like, let's have a family. I'm gonna be a dad. And sometimes it's easy to forget that they're so young that sometimes the gravity of
Yeah,
situations just is not as
especially
consequential.
since we're comparing it to the game, where even though they're the same age, they're a lot more mature.
Mm,
Which, speaking of
right.
which, in the game, when Ellie finds out that Dina is pregnant, she gets upset and they get into an argument. Because she wants Dina to be like, okay, you need to stay here while I go out and do everything, or you need to go back to Jackson. Um, and Dina's like, no, I'm gonna stay out here. We're gonna do this. And
Right.
yeah, that causes a problem and an argument in the game, but in the show, it's all happy go lucky. They're happy.
Mhm. Which I feel like we can definitely get on this with the next episode too, but just Ellie trying to be a patriarch. Like I feel like there is some sort of a theme of Ellie trying to be Joel
Mhm.
and protect. Like I feel like Ellie is trying to put that same type of protector thing on Dina, and I feel like Ellie's trying to prove herself as a protector, and I feel like there is a thread of that there. And like, I mean, immediately Ellie is like, "I'm gonna be a dad." Like Ellie is immediately on that type of energy because she wants to be a protector. Like she immediately puts herself in that role because just like Joel, she can't help but put herself in that type of role.
Just getting into episode 5.
Mhm.
Um, we go to Seattle day 2, and once again we open with the WLF with one of the co-leaders. I forget her name. They did say it at the beginning of last episode as well when she met with
Yeah,
Isaac. Um, but this is a character who wasn't in the game. I'm pretty sure,
yeah,
and she meets with a squad leader, and
mhm.
the squad leader tells her about the the fact that the virus is airborne now. The spores are airborne, like they are, the whole time in the game. And like with the stalkers, they're taking something that's a regular occurrence in the game and making it a much bigger problem. And that opening scene, like every scene where it's just two characters talking, is
Yes.
incredible.
Yeah.
Even with
Mm.
these two new characters that we don't know, or that we don't know well. We've met one of them, but the other one we don't know at all.
Yeah. It kind of reminded me of that one scene, I think in episode 2 of the first season when it was the scientist, like a foreign scientist, and they were asking her about like what the best advice is, and she was just like bomb.
But yeah, that squad leader had to seal her son and his team in the basement. So yeah,
Mm,
it's very similar to that, where it's just like, what do we do? We can't do anything. We have to completely cut it off.
right.
But you,
And y- and also like Craig Mazin himself, he was saying that they wanted that decision to kind of mirror the decision that Joel made.
yeah,
Which that is an interesting point of the alternate reality of if Joel did something else. But again, there's a this I feel like Last of Us is just a show about parenting. It's
hmm,
about I feel
oh
like it's
for
just
sure,
about
absolutely.
family. So like so much of it is about parenting and the effects that parents have on us. But
Which
I
makes
feel
it
like
interesting to think
yeah,
about how they'll continue that theme into a potential third game.
I am interested in how they'll do that. Um and if Ellie will have to tend with that in some way, especially with her having an adoptive child.
I'm trying to think where to go from here because I was just going to jump. I guess we can just
Mhm.
jump straight to the stalkers, really, because I was going
Yeah.
to transition from mentioning how they're taking regular occurrences in the game and making them a bigger problem, like the stalkers, and they do that in
Mhm.
this episode. Ellie and
They
Dina,
do.
um, they go well. Before that, actually, we get another example of how Dina is more of the brains of the operation,
Mm,
and anything that calls for strategy, Dina is the leader. She's taking point. But the
right.
moment shit hits the fan, Ellie takes charge. When they go to when they see one stalker and then they end up seeing, oh, it's like a dozen of them. Ellie immediately takes charge. She immediately acts where Dina kind of like hesitates, and she's able to make decisions very easily in a situation like that, where Dina
Mm,
not so much. And it was interesting to see their dynamic in that way.
yeah. Again, I feel like in earlier in the episode, Dina was triangulating and was trying to figure out routes and just routes for patrolling and how often they do it and where they do it. And Dina's very good at that. But Ellie, being trained as like a young, basically like a young soldier to an extent in Fedra school. Um, with everything that she went through with Joel, with everything that she went through with David, um, like with a lot of the just very high intensity survival fight or flight moments that Ellie's been through, Ellie's somewhat become a master at just very pragmatic, immediate problem solving, which is very different to Dina. And Dina's like the tactician, planner, very prepared, and Ellie's just like, yeah, whenever things seem just completely insurmountable or just completely out of control, Ellie's like, okay, this is what we'll do. And also, again, like it goes into that idea of like Ellie willing to sacrifice herself or wanting to sacrifice herself for people, which
Yeah,
I feel like is another common theme throughout the show. It's just Ellie wants to sacrifice herself.
yeah, and then we get Jesse coming in and saving them from the stalkers in a very
Yeah,
different way than we get him in the game when he comes to Seattle. In the
yeah,
game, I believe he saves you from some wolves that you're fighting, um,
mm,
and then you fight your way through them back to the theater. But here, we get several like gameplay segments from the game kind of rolled into one with them going through the Seraphite forest after they run away from uh, this building that was full of stalkers.
right.
And
Because
yeah, this
yeah,
is an example of how they take, an extended gameplay segment and shorten it into, an action scene that's less than 5 minutes long, because, you don't have to play through the entire stealth section
mm,
in the show. So they could get through it a lot quicker and still get across the same points that they need to. Like in like the story beat that needed to happen here is us seeing this, the way the Seraphites sacrifice people to their goddess or whatever,
mm,
and we see that here.
yeah, like we and we see it. The way that they group characters is different because Ellie does all of that by herself.
Yes,
Like she completely does all of that by herself.
and also
Um,
like we mentioned in a previous episode, Tommy came with Jesse this time, where in the game Tommy left before either even Dina and Ellie left. But this time, Tommy,
right.
being a much more responsible person, stayed behind and only left because he found out that Dina and Ellie left. So him and Jesse went after them.
Mhm. And because in the game, Jesse just kind of popped up.
Yeah, he came after Dina after he found out that they were gone, and so was Tommy.
Hmm.
And yeah, this is another
And
example of us just getting more of Jesse and just
right.
him in this show just being more of a character, and you get more of him, so you like him a lot more. Jesse's one of my favorite characters this season. But with that, I'd like to kind of like circle back to the revenge, or not revenge, but the story of Dina's first kill that we get at the beginning. Isabella Marcet continue to be a highlight of the season for me, and probably my favorite character this entire season. Um,
Mhm.
and she has a great scene where she tells Ellie about the first time she killed someone when um, someone had came in and killed her mother and sister, and she killed them, and how if she didn't come back at that time, she probably would have hunted that person down, and that's why she's going with Ellie, because she understands that pain. And this is just overall, Dina is great in this, and similar in terms of personality to who she is in the game, but there is a major aspect of the character that was changed. And I'm curious why. I wonder if it has anything to do with the political climate we're in. But in the game, she is a South Asian woman and she is Jewish.
Mhm.
And there's a point in the game where they go to like a mosque and she tells a story about being Jewish. And yeah, like she just tells Ellie about the religion because Ellie's just not a religious person, knows nothing. Um, so they just have a brief conversation about it in the middle of like you solving a puzzle. And that's just
Right.
not a aspect of the character in this. Isabella Marcet is Latina and um not Jewish as far as I know. So
Right.
um I'm very curious why they decided to remove that aspect of the character. it's not like ruining anything, but I know that was, and a part of the character that I'm sure a lot of people probably related to and would have liked to see. And
Mm.
I don't know, it's such a random change to make. And I'm
Is that
curious
right?
if maybe the political climate has something to do with it.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if she just gave a good read for the
Yeah,
character.
probably. But at the same time, do you think
Probably
they would just be looking for South Asian women to begin with?
right. Yeah, it's very. That is an interesting choice. I feel like yeah, the climate in regards to everything. I feel like maybe that could have had an effect, but um, in regards to the changes to Dina's character, how would you say it's fared for the series? And like, what is it between the game and between the show? What would you say are the differences, other than like not being Southeast Asian, or just kind of like a lot of those differences for you?
For me, I think it's really just down to us getting more of Dina.
Hmm.
I think it's us getting more of Dina, and also Ellie being significantly like a significantly different character. Like that is just reality of the situation. And I've been seeing a lot
She's
of people talk online about like not liking that, and I get it. It doesn't bother me, but Ellie is
gotcha.
a different character in the show. She just straight up is. Um,
Mhm.
they're playing her as a lot less mature, which at the age of 19, especially in the apocalypse, you could go multiple ways with it. You could be very mature, or you could just be a regular 19-year-old. And they
Yeah,
decided to go more regular 19-year-old with the character in the show, so she hasn't changed too much from the person that she was in the first season. So she's essentially still playing first season Ellie in a lot of ways,
yeah,
and a lot of people aren't a fan of that. I like it because it just makes the show different, and I don't want it to be just like the game. If I wanted that, I just played a game, which I am.
yeah.
So with because of that, Dina is taking on a lot of the qualities that Ellie has in the game in terms of her skills as like we said before, a tactician, navigator, things like that in terms of camping and studying patrols and all of that. Ellie is very adept at that in the game, but in the show she isn't. So Dina fills that role, where in the game she's kind of just along for the ride, and she's emotional support and support in a fight, but not much else. In the show, she is much more than that, and that just helps make the character overall more interesting and more endearing. On top of the fact that you just get so much more of her in general.
Right.
So overall,
Mm.
positive changes.
Yeah, for sure. Because yeah, it is a lot more of Dina, and they integrate her into scenes more because once it's revealed that Dina's pregnant, and the narrative kind of just vanishes for a bit. Like there is a few hours of gameplay all throughout day two, and almost virtually all throughout day three, where Dina just is not there.
Yeah, and because so much of that gameplay is cut in the show, without spoiling things, I can say that like those segments we get with Ellie away from Dina because it's a show, they're not nearly as long. It's not hours of gameplay. It's an hour episode versus multiple hours of gameplay. So you're going to be without Dina for a much shorter period of time in the show once you get to that last episode than you are in the game.
Right. Yeah, I feel like that's a feel like it's going to be a running gag, but yeah, that's like a great consistent thing about the show is the fact that they embrace the fact that they don't have to make gameplay.
Yeah.
Like we can do all of this world building that we want and character building that we want. Because even in episode four, the scene with Isaac, it's hard to do that in gameplay or
Well,
make that even though it is great
I actually did
television.
want to talk about that. This is something that's mentioned in the making of the last episode, but I actually did have it originally in my notes to talk about when discussing episode four, and it's the fact, and it was that scene and how that's different from the games, but how that's one of those things that is just not different because it's a show versus a game, because you can like the game chooses to tell the story from the perspective of the playable characters. It tells the story from the perspective of Ellie and Abby, and you don't know anything that they don't know. Anything that they're seeing or hearing, that's what you're seeing and hearing. Anything outside of that, you don't know. but plenty of games show the perspective of other characters in cutscenes. For example, the Uncharted series, which is also made by Naughty Dog, the developers of The Last of Us. You get
Right.
cutscenes where they show what the bad guys are doing, but Nate is nowhere near them. He has no idea what they're doing, but we do because that's the way they want to tell the story. They could have
Mhm.
did that with The Last of Us. They could have given us, hell, they could have given us a playable flashback with Isaac if they wanted to. But that's just not the
They
story they
could.
wanted to tell, or the way they wanted to tell the
'Cause
story.
yeah, because they wanted to. You could tell they wanted to focus on. I feel like the entire game is an exercise on perspective in video games. Like that's what Last of Us Part Two is. It plays on narrative conventions of video games, just antagonism in video games, and it's just playing with perspective. I feel like doing it with Isaac, it would have pulled out of the narrative maybe a bit. But yeah, I feel like I think it would be cool if they did some playable missions with Isaac. But yeah, I feel like they just really wanted to play with the perspective of Ellie and Abby. Um, and maybe doing it with Isaac would mess with some of the just the perspective world building that they were trying to do. But yeah, I feel like yeah, with The Last of Us Part Two being so based around perspective of character, I felt like they were locked in regards to the characters that you could play as.
Yeah, but in the show, they're able to break that convention and do something different that they didn't
Exactly.
before.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
wrapping up our talk on episode 5, it ends with Ellie going after Nora. Uh, you know, Dina gets shot with an arrow, so Jesse has to carry her back to the theater, and has to split off from Ellie as Ellie kind of distracts the Seraphites. But on the
Hmm.
way, she finds the hospital where Nora is,
Hmm.
and here we get another one of those unchanged scenes that are
Yes.
almost exactly like it is in the video game. We don't get, like I said, gameplay segments of her, like, it's not, especially stuff that just doesn't make sense really when you think about it, like her crawling through the vent.
Right.
um, Instead, we kind of just she sees the hospital, then we cut to her having somehow sneaked in, or actually no, we see her sneak past the wall, and a guard and a dog. But then after that, we kind of just jump to her being in a back room with Nora and pulling a gun on her and holding her up, and you know, her asking where's Abby, and Nora refusing to tell her and saying that Joel deserved what he got, and then Ellie chasing her down and them making their way to the basement of the hospital where the spores are. And Ellie, of course, unaffected. But Nora
Hmm.
gets infected. And we're going to be saying this every episode of this show that we talk about it, but set design, incredible.
It's great.
And the spore filled basement is, just as good as you expect from this show. And
Right.
there's a bit of an eerie kind of beauty to the mushroom lined walls and the
Yeah.
sparkly spores in the air. And
Yeah.
we see the son of the squad leader that we see at the beginning episode, because we
Mhm.
see his name tag, same last name as her and same first initial as the name that she mentioned. and
Mhm.
and then Ellie makes her way to Nora, and we get the essentially exactly how it went down in the game. She starts to torture
Yeah.
her, and then it cuts to black, and that's the end of the episode.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that whole scene?
Um, I do like the detail of showing Nora helping people, like Nora helping people in the hospital, tending to people. Feel like it's a very interesting character detail there of the fact that she kind of like a nurse figure in the hospital and it provides some characterization of her. So it kind of, even to the audience, it could warm them up to her a little bit of like, oh, she's helping people out. They added that scene for a reason to provide some extra just painting towards her character.
Yeah, we also get Nora realizing that Ellie is immune, and that because of that, she was the immune girl that Joel brought to Salt Lake City, and the reason why he killed everyone in the hospital. Um, and Neil Druckmann confirmed that the the cure would have worked, which, you know, I don't think was necessary, but you know they say once you put art out there, it's no longer your own. So we all can just form our own opinions, and um, I like to still think of it being ambiguous, and we don't know, what is what. It could have worked, it could have not worked, and but the fact that it would have worked according to Druckmann is probably reinforcing a lot of people's feeling that Joel is a bad guy, which I agree with. I think Joel is a bad person, but I do also think
Yeah.
the morality is very nebulous in this post-apocalyptic world. So it's really it's different, and I think you should be allowed to change. But at the same time, I think the conversation is really what makes him a bad person is what Abby says. Right before she starts beating him about like how there are some things that everybody agrees is just wrong, and I think him killing a doctor is just wrong. I don't
Yeah.
like in the post-apocalypse. You can't go around killing doctors. You can't do that
Yeah. You
unless,
can't.
like, I think the only exception is if the doctor is like a murderer or sexually assaulting people. At that point, you don't keep the doctor around just because you need a doctor. That guy's got to go. But
I
otherwise,
know, Ab.
you don't just go around killing doctors. And I think that was
Yeah.
like the one of the other things. Obviously, he killed a lot of people, and that was also messed up. And that's also adds to that. But I think for me, the top of that list is killing a doctor.
Killing a surgeon and like one of the only people that could do that surgery. Oh, but yeah. One of the moments, absolutely, that was interesting in that exchange is the fact that like Ellie was aware of what he did and that she didn't feel
Yeah,
like, yeah, she was very just cold. She was like, yeah, I know what he did, which is from the television perspective, that's the first time we as an audience hear that. And it's like, oh, so you know, when did that happen?
exactly.
Which the next episode gets into. But that was kind of a revelation. Like the fact that she knows, but she's still like, I'm going to kill you in Abby.
Then
I
fade to
feel like that was
black.
an interesting character moment. Yep, and then
But
fade to black.
that's not the end of the episode because we get
Right.
the beginnings of a flashback, which at that moment confirmed our theory that episode 6 was going to be a flashback episode, and
Right.
we'll get into that in the next episode of the podcast. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, good having you on again as usual. So you want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me at underscore Black Norma underscore. And that's where I post like a lot of music stuff or updates in regards to anything art related. And yeah, links to a lot of my socials or where I upload music can be found there. So yeah, again, thanks for having me and thanks for the great conversation.